All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Sara Miley. Sara, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here.
Sara is an experienced crisis advocate and an IFS-informed advanced certified trauma recovery coach with her own all-virtual private practice called Circle Wellspring LLC. Through her own learned and lived experiences, she's passionate about helping people find the roots of their suffering. By making sense of their trauma, they can make meaning out of their healing. Her focus is on survivors of developmental childhood trauma, attachment wounds, emotional abuse and neglect, Wells sibling syndrome, among others. She's continuing her education in IFS, somatic embodiment, group coaching, and maternal fetal trauma. Sara is the host of Trauma Survivorhood podcast, and we'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Sara, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. I really appreciate it. Your audience will soon learn why this is a really big full circle moment for me. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So before we get going, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah, so I'm in the New England area, about 30 minutes outside of Boston. That's where I'm from.
Cool.
Moved a handful of times. I was back and forth from both coasts actually a couple of times, but been back here now in New England for about 6 years. So yeah, Boston's kind of home and home.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive in. How did this start for you? How did all this start?
Yeah, such a great question. So I guess maybe starting at the end is a great way to start. So a couple months ago, I turned 40. So that's where I'm at. Throughout my life, I actually struggled with many different types of trauma, actually. And I just see such a link in the word familiarity. So like when thinking about my story, I recognize how much trauma survivors go toward the familiar, right? So, I was born into a family with unhealed generational trauma, emotional immaturity, dysfunction, a family with mental illness, a lot of stress and chaos in my body from a very, very young age, right? So it's almost less about my specific trauma, but more about what I suffered from that, right? And my trauma role really left me with, dissociation, extreme people pleasing. I was the fixer. Fawning is my main go-to response. Hypervigilance, ultra independence, disordered eating, just all kinds of things that, just extreme compliance really to kind of keep the peace. And, you see that kind of threaded throughout my life until really recently. That's really what I've had to heal from, is less about the trauma and processing through that, but actually the effects that it had on me. I also grew up in a religious environment, so there was some confusion there with the incongruencies and hypocrisy that I witnessed. By my early mid-teens, I was kind of open to some vulnerability from some older, sometimes married men. Even in our church setting, there was one man in particular who actually perpetrated on young girls in the youth group. But I wasn't the one that was caught. And so he was kind of removed quietly, actually. And being quiet and being small and being invisible, that was kind of already my thing. So I just stayed quiet and small. I didn't say anything. No one really knew exactly what happened except for his victims. I even joined like a prayer circle to like pray for his healing and pray for his sins, that kind of thing. So late teens, I left on my own and moved out to New York City, which also tracks, right? Chaos and invisibility in New York, right? Felt very familiar. Met a man who felt very familiar. Would find out later those caretaking roles, right? And how far down the line he is in narcissism, just makes a lot of sense now. And I did get pregnant about a year after leaving my family's home. Thankfully, I did leave that relationship with him. He did end up to be, not a great guy, an abusive husband down the road to other people. So very thankful for that. Actually, my fear of intimacy and fear of fear of commitment actually played really well for me there. And he did abandon me with his son. My son's grown now. He's a grown man. And I raised him on my own. So there he was in New York, just working and taking care of this little kid. And I had some really
How old
great
were you
jobs.
at that time?
So I was 19, 20, 21, 22, till about 24. I lived in New York.
Okay.
Or 23, because I came back here when my son was 4. And I had some great jobs. One of them was my boss of all bosses. He was my direct boss, and there was sexual harassment there, inappropriate touching, propositioning, gift giving, and staying small and quiet. I just kind of left and said, go and get a new job. Thanks so much. Bye.
So let me ask you this. So up until this point, had you seen a therapist? Had you thought about, okay, something's going on? Okay.
That came quite a bit later.
Okay.
I wish I had that. That would have been really amazing, actually. What ended up happening after I left that job where I was being harassed, wasn't too long after that, my son and I came back to New England. I was in a lot of debt. Took me many years to kind of get things back in order, right? But I did. Eventually, actually, when things were going really well, that's kind of scary for trauma survivors when things are going so well, right? The shoe's always about to drop. I'd gotten out of debt. I had actually bought a house. I was a work-at-home mom. My son was just involved in all kinds of things. And then right then in the middle of his childhood, the father that he had never met kind of just stormed into our lives, demanding affections, demanding all kinds of things that was not going to work for my son psychologically. And that started a 4-year legal battle.
Oh, God.
And, Guy, I could tell you the corruption in the legal system, what it can be. In great detail. I will spare you the detail, but going through that legal trauma, trying to kind of keep things afloat for my son, who was also kind of struggling. Psychologically, he had a lot of somatic responses to the trauma he was going through with his father. So dealing with that and trying to keep it afloat was exhausting as a solo mom. I started to, have some fibromyalgia type symptoms. It was just very difficult. End of the story ended up great, right? Because the corrupt judge was actually supplanted about 3.5 years in. And the new judge that came in was kind of fixed everything, but not before I went back into a lot of debt, not before I lost my house. But it was worth it battling for that justice for my son. And also during this time in my late 20s, early 30s, I decided to try to go back to church. That just seemed like a familiar path to kind of go. And, even though it didn't end so great, those years that we were there, that support system that actually finally felt like a real family that I had never had before. I don't know that I could have made it through the legal trauma years without that. I met some very few friends left from there, but the ones that I do are very, very close. And then a handful of years ago, some more spiritual abuse happened where some people in power, they kind of decimated almost most of the congregation, actually. So we call that like a church split. And for me, that was like a church family split. And of course, when it rains, it pours. So while all that was going on, some melodrama in my family of origin, some manipulative family members kind of roped me back in, right, to the thing that's familiar, that caretaking role. Fell for it, burned up in my face. So I'm kind of dealing with the church family falling apart. My son is now older and he's starting to struggle with his mental health from what he went through. He's a teen boy. I'm a solo mom raising a teenage son. All these things kind of falling apart together. So 7 years ago, as this all was crumbling around me, I thought, well, before I snap now, let's try therapy. So enter my therapist, who I still see weekly. And the reason I went there, to be honest, was my son was going to be an adult in a couple of years. And I wasn't even 35. And I thought, I have my whole life ahead of me. And I realized I have no idea who I am.
Yeah.
None. Outside of being a mother, a daughter, a sister, a caregiver to everyone else, no clue. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. And I basically sat in my therapist's office and kind of asked him to help me figure out who I was, which of course unleashed all of these years of just unraveling the severe self-abandonment. I couldn't hear my body unless it was screaming in pain, which it often was. I hadn't cried in a decade. I had no literacy for my emotions. The running joke was, Sarah's dead inside. She's a robot. She's cold. I was just even keel, every stoic all the time, but it was because I was detached and so disjointed from my authenticity, my autonomy. And lo and behold, I said, okay, so I've got to figure this out. And I've been a fixer to everyone my whole life. So when I started therapy 7 years ago, I said, I'm going to start for the first time fixing myself. And I still can't even use the word selfish or self-centered. That's very triggering for me because I've been around a lot of narcissism and selfishness. So my therapist and I came up with the word self-focus. That feels better to me. That self-focus into self-care. And that's what I've done. A really deep head dive, very deep, into self-care, taking care of my body. I got this thing called a social life that I had no idea what that was about. I read all the books. I've listened to thousands of hours of podcasts. All the modalities have all had their places. I've done IFS, somatic experiencing, EMDR, psychedelics, hypnotherapy, just trauma recovery coaching, just great tools that have helped me figure out what this is, who I'm, a body, that I'm a person, that I exist, that I'm here. So now I have boundaries. I can do things for myself, without guilt. I did have to go no contact and low contact with some of my family members. That allowed me the freedom to really start, figuring out who I was. And, now there's a practice of, meditation and yoga for the last 6-7 years. I've kind of designed this like psycho-spiritual operating system, right? That kind of keeps me grounded and centered. And, my therapist has helped me unravel, break down, break open, break through, and kind of rebuild. And that's where I've been. Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus.
It's a lot.
Sarah, it's a lot. I want to, first of all, write down what you just said here. Break down, break open.
Break through.
And break through. I want to first just sincerely thank you for sharing all that. I mean, that's a lot. It's a friggin' lot. When you finally went to the therapist, you said it was because of you're about to have the son who was soon to be an adult. So it sounds like you're lucky you found someone who was able to recognize trauma.
Yes, very much so.
Did you recognize trauma when that started to come out? What was that like for you?
Every bit of it along the way made a lot of sense. One of the first books, and I know you'll ask book recommendations down the line, but Stop Caretaking the Borderline and Narcissist and Move On with Your Life. I read that book and I was like, oh, I do have a diagnosis. I am textbook caretaker. I didn't know. I thought I have no mental illness, right? I thought everyone else does except for me, but I actually textbook caretaker, so self-abandoned. And that made so much sense, to not have hunger cues, to not be able to recognize what you need, to not really know what you wanted in your day-to-day life, just so much service to other people. And of course, the religious aspect of this kicks in too, because service is so, that servant's heart is so praised and valued in the church community that it leaves you as a caretaker, it leaves you open, very vulnerable to be taken advantage of, because I couldn't say no. And when I started to realize how horrible it feels to focus on myself at all, that made a lot of sense. I see this. I see these trauma roles that I've taken on to try to fix everybody else and to create a safe space for myself. So yeah, it was hard to take a look at, and now I seek it. Now I'm hungry for it because it makes so much sense. And I've been looking at psychology since I was younger. Because we have mental illness in the family, there was like psychology books around. And I've always found neuroscience and human behavior really, really exciting. But to see it for yourself, it's hard, right? Because like you're in it. So
right.
You just think you're doing the right thing to help everyone else, but it's really at the detriment of yourself, All
right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. how did things unfold such that you became interested in trauma, in creating your own business and so forth, and ultimately having your podcast too?
Yeah. So this is where it gets good, right? Because this is my full circle moment here with Guy McPherson on the Trauma Therapist podcast. So in all this seeking, right, I'm hungry. I need therapy. I need neuroscience. I need to know modalities, literally thousands and thousands of hours of podcasts. And you've been one of my favorite ones, because I love that you bring people here. They've always been through their own stuff, and they're always on the other side of it, now making an impact in some kind of psychotherapy or spiritual world, some kind of practitioner, right? And I loved listening to that. And I thought, wow, one of these days I'd love to be in that place where I can really help people. And I was advocating. I do advocacy work for a YWCA community, which is domestic violence and sexual assault victims. I love crisis work. I always wanted to be a 911 operator. I love that in the moment, that helping that person right there when they're, at their worst, right? And so I was kind of weaning my way into this as I'm figuring my stuff out. And for decades, people have been throwing the word life coach at me. Oh, my friend Sarah, she'd be a great life coach. Strangers that, of course, I'm caretaking a stranger right in the middle of the street. And they're like, are you a life coach? You'd be a great life coach. Nothing stuck. And I'm glad it didn't, because to actually help people from a place of, self-energy and not self-abandonment, I needed to do a lot of work. So I would have just burnt out as a life coach, right? But January of 2020, I think it was episode 417, you had on Jennifer Kindera. She was from the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches, founded by Bobby Parrish. And I was listening, I was doing dishes. I always listen on double time. And you introduced her as a certified trauma recovery coach. And I said, that's it. That's the thing. It was like a warmth in my soul. I stopped doing the dishes. I was like, that's it. This is it. This is my life. And now, of course, I had to listen to the episode to find out what the heck a trauma recovery coach was.
Right.
But I was like, that's going to be it. And then 2 months later, right, the pandemic hit. And I think everyone was kind of figuring themselves out. A lot of changes in the pandemic. And, for me, the pandemic just asked me, what impact are you going to make? What are you going to do with your changes, with your healing? And I went to her site and found out how to become a certified trauma recovery coach. She was actually one of my supervisors in my initial cert. I've then gone on to do the advanced certification. I've done classes with Linda Ty and with the IFS Institute now as well. But yeah, I immediately found Jennifer in the association. I was like, I'm here because remember you were on Guy's podcast? And she's like, oh, that's great. So she was a supervisor in my initial certification.
Wow.
So I thank you for bringing this platform to let people know even what modalities and spiritual practices are available to themselves.
Yeah.
But in turn, you kind of changed my whole professional life too. So
wow. Well, you're certainly welcome. I mean, I'm honored. It really makes me feel good.
Yeah.
But you are amazing. I mean, what you've gone through is so crazy. I mean, so awful, but the way you articulated your journey and how you've used that to in turn help others is so inspiring. I mean, it's what this podcast is about.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. It's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of now is using that healing. So thinking about the difference of like caretaking, and it doesn't really matter that I got there because of the developmental trauma. Like these were skills I learned to keep myself safe, which is horrible, right? But they were still skills, being able to sense people, to know how to resource people, right? To advocate for people, to stand up for injustice, those kinds of things, reading auras, right? Holding space for people. Those were still skills that I've honed. Now, though, I get to turn that around and working as a coach, I'm now working for people that are first asking for help, right? Because, when you're in a caretaker role, you're not always asked. You're just assumed to be the rescuer. You're the fixer. And sometimes it's always at the detriment of yourself, but sometimes it's at the detriment of the person you're helping. Sometimes it turns into enabling. Mine certainly did for certain people. But now it's like, not only are they asking, but they're willing to put in the effort to do their work also, which is really beautiful because I'm not doing any heavy lifting. In fact, if you're not in this, I can't coach you. I can't guide you. I can't resource you if you're not doing the work for yourself. So I still get to be that person, but now with, boundaries and not self-abandoning, doing it from a place of, I'm good at this and I know how to do it and I want to do it. And you want me to help you do it. So totally different, even though they're very similar skills, Let
me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Sara Miley. Your website is fullcirclewellspring.com. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Sara, you sound, how long were you in therapy? How long, when did you first start therapy? How many years ago?
Almost 7 years now. And okay. I still see one particular practitioner, my main therapist, literally saw him 2 hours ago for our weekly session.
Okay. Then the reason why I ask, and not to say, to be judgmental in the sense that, you've had X amount of years, of course you're healed, but you sound as though you've worked through a lot of what you've gone through.
A lot. I'd say it's a mix of doing so much work on my own, having that relationship with my therapist on a regular basis with multiple other practitioners as well. I've done a lot of body work, energy work, trying to move things through. I'm actually in the middle of doing somatic experiencing, so I'm still working in the somatic piece. But then I did a lot of work on my own, a daily mindfulness practice, regularly trying to get into my own body through yoga, creating safe people around me. Going no contact and low contact with family members is difficult. And sometimes it's really the answer to kind of free you from some of those tethers that you had. I think of the Untethered Soul, Michael Singer's book, right? Tethers are going to trigger you constantly because you're still connected. So a lot of that was just making hard daily choices to get up and do the work and be the work, breathe it, eat it, sleep it,
When did you get to the point where you were like, you know what, I want to do this. I want to help other people. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. I love working with people. I love talking even with strangers, even with, just coming in contact with people who are interested in healing, are interested in actually moving forward, moving through stuff, moving through grief. So I think it's always been there because some of the jobs I've done have been very helper jobs, administrative jobs, things like that, nannying jobs, taking care of other people's children, still in that caretaking kind of role, but in very fulfilling ways, right? And even though there was that draw, but it never hooked me, thankfully, was the life coach thing, that still made sense to my personality. And it wasn't until I heard your words saying, Jen, as a certified trauma recovery coach, did it stick where I'm now able to help people move forward, but because of what they've been through, maybe they have more, we call them like trauma blocks, because a life coach with someone who's a trauma survivor can't always be successful if they don't know what those trauma blocks are. Why can't you lose weight? Well, there's a disordered eating problem that's not being addressed, right? So that combination of that cheerleader support, trauma coaching is very collaborative. It's totally client-led. We don't set treatment plans like a therapist might. We're setting collaborative recovery goals. So I think that aspect has always been there, that hunger and desire, but it needed to be in a not self-abandoning kind of way, and that's what I've been able to find the last few years now working in this field. So I'm very grateful for that.
You emanate a certain kind of not just lived experience, but an ability to call upon that experience to help others. You have this inspiring presence about yourself. I mean, you're so open about what you've gone through in your experience. And for me, I'm very much drawn to, my God, you have this experience. You're of course you're able to help me with life and move through trauma blocks and so forth. You're pretty awesome.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much.
You really are. My God. So who comes to you? Who's your ideal client?
Yeah, so I generally, for some reason, tend to see women. I'm open to men as well, but there's maybe just a camaraderie there. I'm not sure, or people who identify as women. Usually it's childhood trauma. I find a lot of attachment wounds and developmental childhood trauma where there was something in the family, either they were a scapegoat or they were neglected. They were, we say, well, child syndrome, right? Which is like the invisible glass child, the one where if there was someone who had a mental or a physical illness, the other siblings were like, well, they're okay enough. So they become like ultra independent. They find it hard to find intimacy in relationships, that kind of thing. Mainly it's emotional and relational traumas because they're trying to now work through, why am I not connected to my emotions and why am I struggling in relationships? And so we kind of backtrack. And being an IFS informed coach as well, IFS is my favorite type of modality for myself and to guide my clients to healing, because you're really getting to that inner child work and finding those parts that were so wounded that haven't been heard in all these years. Yeah.
And do you do your work, everything, I think it's all virtual, as we said in the bio?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All on Zoom. Yeah. So right now I do one-to-one sessions, and I also do IFS focused sessions for people who are just looking to dive deep into IFS. I was doing group coaching for a little while, and then I kind of ran out of space for that. So if it really, was a need, and I felt it was a need, I would move back into that. And then as years go on, I mean, the goal is to maybe even do some psychoed kind of classes. I'm so interested in maternal fetal trauma, and there's something there. I haven't put a finger on what that's going to look like yet, but that's coming down the line. So I'd say anyone who's maybe interested in those things down the line could sign up for the newsletter, because that's where I'll make those announcements. So, but right now it's one-to-one coaching.
Okay. And tell us about your podcast. What's it called?
Yeah, Trauma Survivorhood. So this little guy started as just a way for me to kind of give back to the community. The first 78 episodes last year, I did 3 of them a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
Wow.
Solo casts. Short, little 7 to 12 minutes. Mondays, I did like a guided meditation. Wednesdays, I focus on internal resources. Self-compassion, understanding what happened to your brain during trauma. Friday was external resources, modalities, book recommendations, things like that. And when I started it, I just started getting all these emails from people who wanted to be interviewed. And I was like, well, this is spam, right? I'm not an interview style. And I got so many of them that when I finished this first season, after 26 weeks, I did a letter of the alphabet. I said, okay, I can record let's do some bonus content and let's just see how it works. So in the fall, I released 8 episodes of bonus content of interview style, which was very popular. And still people were emailing me, asking me to be interviewed. So I switched it up. January, we started with season 2 as an all interview podcast now.
Nice.
The goal is to diminish stigmas and to just bring inspiring stories of hope. And we really focus, my goal is still really resources, just podcasts are free. So it's just free resources. Not only what my guests are bringing, right? Like maybe they've written a book. Now we have this as a resource of your book. Yeah. But what were your resources that helped you get to where you got as well? So that everyone's kind of learning from each other's experience. So it's been great. It's a lot of work, but it's fun.
Well, awesome. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So, all right. You have your Full Circle Wellspring. You have your podcast.
Yes.
What else is coming up for you that you want to talk about that we can mention? Yeah.
So the podcast is always on, and that's going to keep going as long as I have people to interview. I'm also on Facebook at Full Circle Wellspring. They can also watch the interviews and all of the archives of season 1 as well on the YouTube, which is at Full Circle Wellspring. And they're all linked up in there. Yeah. And people can email me if they'd either like to be on the podcast or if they have questions about, working with me, or if people are looking for group therapy. I'm excited about that. And we do have a certification available now to work with adolescents and teens. Oh. And I know that is such an underserved population. Yeah. And so in the next year or so, that's a goal to be certified, to be able to work with people. Right now it's 18 and plus is my certification, but I'd love to be able to work with teens as well, because most of what you're seeing is going to be trauma-based stuff. with teens. You know, they go through a lot. They've been through the pandemic as growing teens. Like, I think everybody's got that collective trauma going on now. So
awesome.
yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Sara, man, awesome. So glad you reached out, and it's been a pleasure to have you on here. I'd love to have you back at a later date. Yeah.
Thank
your book. You had a book recommendation. I wanted to get that.
I did. Yes. And you know what? And I wrote it down so that I would say, I'm not going to say it because I don't know how to say her name, but I will spell it for them. So we can talk about ones that are helpful for everyone. Body Keeps the Score, anything that Edith Eger does. I mean, No Bad Parts if you want to learn basics of IFS, but ones that were personally impactful to me. The authors is Margulies Fjellstad. I should have looked it up. It's Fjellstad, and that's called Stop Caretaking the Borderline or Narcissist, How to End the Drama and Get On with Your Life. And then, if you're in a space as a daughter, a book that I'm recommending now to women who have difficult relationships with their mom is Kelly McDaniel's book, Mother Hunger. And it's a little bit of a difficult one. So maybe I'd recommend people to see with their clinicians if that's a good read for them, because it's a little tough, but it's a doozy. It's a good one.
Okay. Awesome. Look, awesome having you on here. We'll talk soon.
Much.